Hello, class, and welcome back to Business 181 Global Business, an online course. This is module number 4 as we move along, and I'm hoping you continue to build on everything you've learned in the first 3 modules. So, as what is customary, let's just take a few minutes to review some of the things that we discussed in module number 3. Once again, we have our objectives that I know you've looked at over and over again. Basically, awareness, understanding, familiarity. These are all so important for us to really get a good grip on all of the different elements of international business. One of the things that we talked about the last time was the theory, the Heckscher-Ohlins theory. Actually, it was by Ohlin, who was a Swede, and Heckscher was his teacher, and he professed that a country with export goods that uses its abundant factors intensively and import goods that use its scarce factor intensively basically is doing the right thing. Well, he won the Nobel Prize for economics for this theory. We also talked about absolute advantage, specialization, opportunity cost, and comparative advantage. We also gave some examples of Michelin and Starbucks. And again, this is important to remember when making a choice about who it is you want to do business with. Opportunity cost is the cost of taking one decision over another. This cost is not only financial, but also in time, effort, and utility. Opportunity cost can lead to optimal decision making when factors such as price, time, effort, and utility are continued. So let's move on to module number 4. And basically, we're talking about global business and about marketing products and producing them for distribution. So globalization of markets refers to the merging of historically distinct and separate national markets into one huge global marketplace. Instead, there is the global market, which falling trade barriers make it easier to sell globally. Consumers' tastes and preferences are converging. Firms promote the trends by offering the same basic productions worldwide. So who does this sort of thing? Well, here are some very good examples. Coca-Cola, Starbucks, Citigroup credit cards, McDonald's, and IKEA furniture is another one. So the globalization of production refers to the sourcing of goods and services from locations around the globe to take advantage of national differences in the cost and the quality of factors of production, like land, labor, and capital. So then companies compete more effectively by lowering their overall cost structure or improving the quality or the functionality of their product offerings. So again, some of the categories we're talking about are labor costs and availability, land costs, raw material availability, skills, and also the people that reside in those locations, their capability to do the work that's being planned. So anyway, how did all this happen? What mechanisms are in place to allow a company to move into the global market successfully? It's a very good question. We're going to talk about some of those things. So we're going to look at some of the ways companies go global. Some of the things we're going to talk about: international licensing agreements, international franchises, international manufacturing agreements, and then outsourcing. Also, what they call strategic alliances and joint ventures, And these are basically the kind of menu that companies have to employ when they want to be involved with companies abroad. All right, so let's go to international licensing. So this is a licensing agreement that, in fact, is a contract between two parties, and they're called the licensor and the licensee, in which the licensor grants the licensee, like you can get tripped up with those words, the right to use the brand name, trademark, patented technology, or even the ability to produce and sell goods owned by the licensor. So here you see basically a look at a Coca-Cola truck where, again, Allied Products has been licensed by Coca-Cola as a distributor. Or you have international franchises. We're talking about a franchisor grants to an individual or a company who is the franchisee the right to run a business selling a product or a service under the franchisor's successful business model and identified by the franchisor's trademark or brand. Now, these are pretty interesting because I've been to many McDonald's around the world. So, for example, if you get a hamburger in Japan, or it used to be this way, it kind of had a taste of like, I used to think it tasted like fish or seaweed, but it was seasoned in a way that was attractive to the palate of the Japanese citizen. Or in India, there was a McDonald's franchise that basically came under the gun for providing hamburgers in a place where the slaughtering of beef or cows for beef is prohibited. So later they had to come up with lamb burgers, which were called Maharaja burgers. Again, you can learn a little bit more about this on a YouTube clip that I have provided. Or you can have outsourced manufacturing. This is where a company like Nike really became very, very wealthy. The CEO, Phil Knight, put plants all over the world where there was low labor. So basically, Nike as a business never made anything, but they did outsource all their labor through suppliers and then worked on their own distribution and marketing efforts. So outsourced manufacturing consists of hiring people outside of the company to assemble part of or to build an entire product. Remember, I mentioned the bill of material before. The main reason why companies choose to do this is to cut costs, and labor is often among any company's largest costs. Now, this brings up another topic, and I believe you looked at this in a reflection paper, and that is there have been accusations about child labor and labor abuse. And there are many, many schools of thought on how that fits into a particular culture. Some say people that are working for very, very small amounts of pay per hour, it still has improved their quality of life by providing them with employment they never had before. Others are saying it's sweatshop and it's a violation of human rights. Later on, another module I'll provide you with a small presentation from a group called Team Sweat, which is an NGO, where they attacked, in particular, Nike to improve the wages and working conditions of people. So, very interesting subject. Again, it's improved quite a bit around the world. But again, outsourcing is a wonderful way to lower your cost of labor, which can be one of your biggest costs. And then we have joint ventures. Again, here's some examples over there. Coca-Cola with Procter & Gamble, Skinny Delight, Pringles. And here are some examples how big some of these can be. And then we have some joint ventures. Here's BMW and Toyota. Joint ventures are usually formed by two businesses that have complementary strengths. For example, a technology company may create a partnership with a marketing company to bring an innovative product to market. Again, we have a YouTube clip if you want to refer to that. Here's one of the worst joint ventures of all time. And this had to do with the merger of Daimler-Benz Mercedes with Chrysler. And here we have our two players. This is Robert Eaton, who had been with General Motors most of his life, kind of went up through the ranks. And then Jürgen Schrempp, the CEO and president of Daimler-Benz. What is a joint venture? Well, they are usually formed by two businesses with complementary strengths. For example, a technology company may create a partnership with a marketing company, just as I said in the previous slide. However, this one fell apart. There was a book written called Taken for a Ride by Bill Vlasic and Bradley Steet that chronicles the fact that this merger never, ever worked the way it was supposed to. And some of it had to do with some very dubious intentions that Mercedes had about how to use Chrysler to their benefit, and some suppositions that they had that their joint venture would share in technology and lower production cost. It was supposed to be what they called a merger of equals. But what happened was culture got in the way, and it was a total abject failure. This is something you might even want to write about. So there are cultural differences that can happen in these international relationships. And again, the moral of the story is to do your homework and to fully understand who it is you're doing business with. There are reasons why international business deals fail that have to do with interculture. Number one, and I'm going to talk about these later on in the course to give you specific examples of some failures. But one is the inability to adapt to local markets. You know, for example, just quickie, Walmart moved into China and they had a frozen fish department. Well, the Chinese only wanted fresh fish. So again, there can be many failures. Disneyland in France basically tried to get the French people to conform to the ideas that there would be no liquor sold, that all the employees would be cheery and friendly, that there would be no facial hair, so on and so forth. So you have to understand what you're dealing with in these markets. And if you cannot adapt, you're going to fail. So again, a lack of consideration for regional differences within a country. You know, would you centralize the operation or put decentralized operations in different parts of the country? Sometimes the companies didn't understand local business practices. That might have to do with hours of operation, locations of retail outlets, so on and so forth, and some legal issues. And then again, I just mentioned there's not adapting management practices across cultures, misunderstandings of local, legal, and ethical issues, and incompatible mergers due to cultural differences. So this can be a really big problem. In fact, you may remember in the beginning of this course, I showed a illustration of Peter Drucker, who basically said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Because the strategy is meaningless unless you can coexist with the cultures of a country. Okay, and there's more. Not identifying market-related activities, not modifying HR practices to match local markets. I mean, you might be in a place where the religious practices are in conflict with the number of hours a week that you want the employees to work, or their pay, how it's structured. and also not managing diversity in management and the workforce. There's a really great DVD. It's kind of humorous. It's called Outsourcing. And it's about a guy who gets transferred to India to take over an outsourced call center. And it's quite hilarious, but it also points out all the things that you can do in the way of misunderstanding a local culture. And that would be assignment failures where people are sent somewhere without any knowledge of how any of this stuff is supposed to work. Now, this is kind of humorous. I thought I would throw it in here to liven things up. But here's a look at Japan. Now, remember me when I was about maybe 35, got sent to Japan for a couple months. I was what they called a fast tracker. And they wanted to really immerse me in the Japanese culture. Actually, I think I was younger. But here are some of the things that I saw at that time. So these were things that you're running into that are not necessarily at work, but have to do with living there. Okay, number one, they're a highly disciplined society. They're what is known as a collectivist society where nobody is supposed to step out of line but to conform to rules. Here they are waiting very patiently in line to get on a train. And because the space needs to be optimized, you have what they call pushers. And these are officers that push people on and jam people in there like sardines in order to maximize the load and be more efficient on a train. Now, I was with a couple of other guys on this trip, and they were American, and they really took offense with this. Like, how dare you put your hands on me or push me? But that's quite normal. Quite normal. I mean, there's a lot of things that are quite normal there that didn't register well at the time. Also, back then, before COVID, people that had a cold would, out of courtesy, wear a mask to make sure that they didn't infect other people. This society really relies on public transportation and close proximity of one human being to another. So this was an absolute must. And if you got on that train and began coughing and didn't have a mask on, you definitely would receive some dirty looks. And as a matter of fact, if you look in this train station, you can see some people standing there with masks. Another thing in business, when you greet somebody, again, one way to be courteous is to bow. And you don't want to overdo it. Depending on the management level of a manager and your management level, you might only give them a nod of a head. Or if they're a little bit higher up or important, 30 degrees. Or maybe if it's a CEO or a president or a director, a very deep bow. And you can see these folks over here. Also, business cards. They're extremely important because they say who you are. So when you hand a person a business card, you present it. And then when you receive it, you're supposed to spend a deliberate amount of time reading the card to show the respect for that person. If you don't, they'll probably think that you're a very poorly educated, poorly raised person. Here's another thing that's quite unnerving. I've done countless presentations in front of Japanese. And quite often when you're doing your presentation, you look into the audience and it looks like everybody is sleeping. So, you could be insulted. Or you could think, well, I didn't even want to talk about this subject, so let me just get by it because they're not listening anyway. But what would happen invariably after you went through a 50 slide presentation, they might say, Jim-san, that slide that you presented about travel time of transportation, I believe it was slide number 46. Can you go back to that? So they call it listening with their eyes closed, thinking with their eyes closed, to show great respect for the person who's presenting. And again, at a meeting, it's not uncommon to see people with their eyes closed. Another thing is hierarchy is important. Now, this is the president of Japan. you'll see they have a lot of directors here, and then they'll have layers of people at lower levels that must be informed of what's going on. The morning commute, it's quite normal to be on a very pristine train, sit down, and have the people next to you fall asleep and actually lean over and fall on you. Normal. And this one is very interesting. Because of the close proximity on some commuter trains later in the day, people were very close to one another, male and female. And a lot of the Japanese women felt that some older men, the title of dirty old men, would take advantage of this closeness, if you know what I mean. So what they did is they put together trains that were only for women. That's this pink train. Actually, a very funny story. One of my friends actually got on this train and was the only person on there. I was in the next train looking through the window at him. And the women looked like they were going to beat him with their umbrellas because it rains a lot there and they carry umbrellas. Another thing is, if you're in a restaurant, if you go into a bathroom, you have to put toilet slippers on. And then when you come out, take them off and put your other slippers on because they don't want to contaminate the floor with anything from the bathrooms. Another thing is, after work is important. So when you work all day long, they'll normally appoint somebody called the after 5 manager who is going to put together an agenda for where you're going to go that night. So here's everybody singing, drinking, smoking. Now you can't say to those people, I don't drink, I don't smoke, and I want to go to bed early, I want to work on my computer. That could destroy the business relationship. So it's very important you understand what's expected from a social point of view. For example, in South America, they always expected me to come down, well, actually in Puerto Rico a few days early, so I could go ride motorcycles with the dealer or get on their boat, their big yacht. And a lot of that stuff was against HR policies with Honda. But if you didn't do that, you basically would kind of alienate your dealer or distributor. Another thing is this drinking. One of the things is you never pour your own drink into your own glass. Out of courtesy, you exchange the pour. I pour into yours, you pour into mine, and then unfortunately, sometimes the end of the night is like this. And guess what? If you were on this train going home at night, you would just step over this person. There would never be any judgment. And at that time, it was felt that the Japanese businessmen, especially by their wives, at least it's been said, had so much pressure on them that cutting loose with alcohol on a night on the town was kind of normal, and this was really not unusual to see. In fact, it was expected when this person somehow miraculously stood up at his train stop, he would get up and basically go home and expect his wife to have a cool rag for his head and a miso soup. So anyway, let's go back to these alliances again, but I thought I would break up the presentation with a little bit on culture and provide a little bit of humor. So strategic alliances, you take, for example, Starbucks. Who did they align with? Well, you can see certain airlines, certain bookstores. So strategic alliances are agreements between independent companies to cooperate in the manufacturing, development, or sale of products and services. So you can see that on the airlines if you've flown, or at least before the restrictions were as tight as they are, that a certain airline would proudly serve Starbucks. Other alliances, same reasons, but basically sometimes it has to do with technology. So for example, you see these pictures here. On the right, you see an Isuzu Rodeo, and on the left, you see a Honda Passport. That's the early ones. I guess you wonder why I'm showing you these. Well, at that particular time, we had no SUV Honda. and we were losing a tremendous amount of market share. So we put together a strategic alliance, a venture with Isuzu, was based in Indiana, and the idea was to buy their product or work with them to install Honda engines in them, Honda steering wheels with an H on it, and dashboard configurations, so that suddenly, voila, we had the Honda SUV that we never had before. And we did that as a strategic alliance and a venture with Isuzu. We also did that with the Isuzu Trooper for Acura. Also, again, we're talking about Honda right now working with General Motors for electric vehicle technology and hybrid technology. This is in order to enable Honda to stay in the game, who in many respects got caught a little bit behind the eight ball with the development of certain products. And another thing is that I want to bring out is that you should have a word of caution. There are things that can happen if you have a weak agreement, especially with working with some companies that are prone to steal any one of the followings: intellectual property rights, intellectual property, patents, copyrights, trademarks, and then overall piracy of stealing your products. I remember one year we had one other manufacturer was stealing our design of our electrical manuals for technicians, and they were using it and they were violating copyright laws and also some patents we had on certain things. Also, working with another company, trademarks are important. Unless you have an agreement, they can't use your trademark. Or if you have some exotic intelligence in your technology, this stuff can be stolen, and this is really the hallmark of Japan. Pardon me, excuse me, China. So anyway, where are products made? Well, again, here's a Kubota tractor, and it's probably filled with all sorts of controls. And then how do they get there? Well, in the logistics side of it, and this, I went to Georgia Tech, as I mentioned, for a couple years, on weekends and nights and all that, to sharpen up on my logistics skill because I got transferred into the logistics division. I didn't know anything about it. So I took me and about four of my direct reports. We all went there. And logistics are very complex. So on the purchasing, forecasting side, there are things that need to be considered very carefully. Pricing agreements, warranties for the products you buy. What's their forecasting methodology? Do you give a 90-day forecast? Are you allowed to pull forward a month if you need to? What is the lead time? How do you procure or pay for your products? How do you buy them? And how do you pay them? What form? And then how are they to be delivered? And you can see a little bit of a diagram here. It's a fascinating subject. So you have ordering, receiving, invoicing, and then when the product is on board, who owns that product? Well, usually the person that is delivering it owns it to the point where they transfer it to the consumer. So when we receive things from Japan, for example, they owned it till it became with us, and everybody along the way was responsible for damage, etc. So back to this, where were things made? Well, I mentioned a bill of material earlier, maybe a little prematurely, but a bill of material is a comprehensive list of parts, items, assemblies, sub-assemblies, intermediate assemblies, documents, drawings, and other materials required to create a product. So here's a simple example of a skateboard. Here's the complete built unit, known as a CBU, and then underneath you have all these parts. Now, did one person, one factory, make all of these parts? Probably not. They had to order them from other suppliers, which creates a certain vulnerability. If these, let's suppose I want 4 wheels and they ran out of them and I only get 3. Well, you can't, it's a showstopper. You can't sell the skateboard. So a bill of material is very important to understand. And these things may come from completely different suppliers. Sometimes they refer to them as type tier 1, tier 2 suppliers. So, who does what? Well, here's an extreme example. That shirt, designed by a company in Belgium. The cotton could be from Brazil and Texas. It was turned into cloth in China in their mills. It was stitched together in Haiti, and the screen was printed in Washington State, and it was distributed in the United States. Now, there are regulations about this thing in. So when a product is brought into the United States, there is such a thing as called harmonization or country of origin. All these are important consideration. And then there are cultural misunderstandings. For example, when you go to Japan or China, everybody wants to wear something that looks like it came from California or the United States. So they misuse the language. Look at some of these silly examples. Precise dwarf bravery. Don't choice, I wicked want funny. What'n gonna be nobody's cool. So we used to buy these shirts and bring them back and wear them for fun. But if you're going to buy a shirt from somebody, you better make sure that they understand the message. And faxing things back and forth sometimes doesn't work as well in the area of communication as it should. And of course, here's a biggie, and all of us are feeling that right now, that if you look at this simple iPhone, and this can change at any given time depending upon what sourcing decisions are made. But here you have like 5 steps to make this phone, and things come from different places. Once again, we're seeing the examples of showstoppers in terms of circuit boards that can't be completed because of chips right now. And of course, the same thing would have to do with a computer or television set or this airplane. So again, there are places where things come from. Here's an example of beer. So that's about it for module number 4. I hope you think it was packed with interesting facts. And the reason I do these presentations is because sometimes you won't find in the books or the readings what I can share with you. So I think putting all this together should give you a pretty good understanding from a variety of different dimensions about some of the nuances in international business. So that's about it. I want to thank you very much. Don't forget, make sure you get your assignments in on time. Remember I said once you're late, everything seems to be downhill from there. Thank you very much, and I hope this course is adding some tools to your management toolbox.